And I have a great, amazing lineup of panelists with me. And before we get to them, I just want to talk about why we're talking about resilience. This is an area of increasing interest for CTA, for the tech industry, for governments. We are seeing increasing waves of disruption, man-made, natural disasters, and it's more important than ever that we think about how we can bounce back from these things quickly, how we can get our infrastructure and all of our systems back up and running, and how the government and the tech industry can work together to make that possible. So we're going to do some sort of rapid scenario planning here this morning. To my right, we have Andre Hentz. He is the Deputy Undersecretary for the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. Next to him, we have Bob Kolosky, who is with DHS's new Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And on the end, Governor Martin O'Malley, former governor of Maryland. And so this is an interesting panel because we have different perspectives here. We have the federal perspective, we have the state and local perspective. So I want to keep some time at the end to dive into the question, letting the audience ask us some questions. So I want to start by asking each of our panelists to give us one example of how they are thinking about building resilient communities in the wake of these natural and man-made disasters. And Andre, I want to start with you. I want to know what DHS is doing to improve outcomes, to mitigate the next potential disaster, and maybe you have some examples of what you've done in the past that's worked well.
Absolutely, and good morning, and thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. So I have a simple challenge. I try to understand what my good friend Bob's challenges are in the wake of his operational mission, and I've been given an investment portfolio to identify technical capabilities that help drive down risk, quite simply. So in the instance of resilience, let me talk about what we're doing in the area of flood and disaster mitigation. So I actually live in the state of Maryland. I work downtown DC. And most recently, and I'm shamelessly plugging this because I got the governor down here.
Good man, keep plugging.
So Ellicott City, Maryland, flooded twice in the past couple years. Incredible, like 100-year level floods. So what we're doing is we're working with the state and local community to try to identify low-cost Internet of Things devices that can be retrofitted in Ellicott City to give indications and warnings when a flood is imminent, right? Because the reality is that 9 out of 10 deaths in a hurricane are attributed to the fact that there's a flood surge. And incident commanders and the general population, they need to leverage technologies that are already existing to be able to help save property and lives. So we're doing that kind of initiative in the state of Maryland and elsewhere, here with the Lower Colorado River Authority in Texas. And also, we're trying to take advantage of other resilient capabilities, things like Twitter, for example. We work with that community to take advantage of things that seem intuitive, but not necessarily for the federal government. For example, people are on rooftops. They're saying, hey, I'm flooded. I can't get out. My grandfather is in a situation. Well, as the federal government, what we try to do is interface with those kinds of data points and get them to the right location for search and rescue purposes. It seems pretty simple, but for those complex systems that's inside the federal government and state and locals, they need that connective tissue. And what we're ultimately trying to do is motivate industry to become an industrial base on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security. Not that dissimilar from the Defense Department. It's just that my budget is really, really small.
That was good. Yes. Ellicott City is a great example, and that does lead me into Governor O'Malley. I want to know, it would be great if you could sort of zoom out and tell us what you're doing or what you think is most important to get businesses back on track, to bounce back, how you use data to get organizations back on track, what you're doing.
Yeah, look, Rachel, thanks, and it's awesome to be with you and everybody at CTA, and thanks for having me on this panel. Look, when disaster strikes, there's really just 4 questions every leader, whether you're a mayor, whether you're a governor, has to answer. 1 is what has happened. 2, your people want to know what you're doing about it. And 3, they want to know what they and their families should be doing about it, or their business should be doing about it. And the ability to answer those questions is all really a question of where. and where are the cascading results from this disaster that are going to affect my business? They're going to close down my business. How long will it take? What are you doing about it? I saw an interesting company at a pitch contest for the U.S. Conference of Mayors just a couple of days ago here at South by. You know it's a cool event when it loses its other coordinate. You can get there just by saying South by. You don't even need to know you're going west. It was a company called Augmented. And what Augmented does is they take advantage of today's technology, the ability to model our natural, our built, our physical environment, the intersections of critical infrastructure, and they use that to create a training regimen, like a video game, if you will, for first responders, but also for emergency management and resilience planners, so that you can know where your single points of failure are, so that you understand the things that if they strike in these places where it can shut down your downtown for days and days and days. The first big emergency we had when I was, shortly after I was elected mayor, was a huge tunnel fire underneath Baltimore. One entrance was at Camden Yards where a doubleheader was going on. The other entrance, the north entrance, was 1.8 miles away. Smoke was billowing out both sides. It was like a giant fire going on in a long brick oven built by the B&O Railroad in 1912 that just happened, oh, by the way, to stop and reach its highest temperature right underneath the largest pipe that fed the water for the entire downtown, which quickly blew up. And it also disrupted light rail right where it went through the middle of downtown. And unbeknownst to us, well, actually the tunnel was unbeknownst to us. When my chief of staff told me that we've had a bit of a train wreck, I said I knew they'd screw up that library closure press conference. He said, no, a real train wreck. I didn't even know we had a tunnel running under the city. What I also didn't know was that it was a major fiber optic line that fed the entire East Coast. So a lot of you had your internet disrupted. Today, there's really no excuse for mayors, especially, not to know where those critical single points of failure are and to plan for their resilience and their backup and the ability to rewire the heartbeat of your city and your businesses in order to get back up and running as quickly as possible.
Just one more question for you is, where does the data come in? What is the data that is most critical to you, like after this tunnel fire? What did you need first at your fingertips? Yeah,
it's really the question, it's the data of where. Where is it happening? Where are my assets that I can deploy to mitigate it? Where are the cascading events that are likely to roll from this? They're all questions of where. They're all geo questions, really. And they exist out there, but in the past, we've all bemoaned. It's almost like a drinking game in government. Every time someone says the phrase separate silos of information, you roll your eyes, everybody packs up and leaves. That's my data, not yours type of thing. But they're all questions, Rachel, of where. And we can model that. And we can know much better than we ever have before in real time. And then you can game and model the cascading effects, just as you do the dynamic effects every day of traffic moving across intersections. You can model, make some presumptions about what the effect of a tunnel fire like that would be if it happened at this point, at that point, or God forbid something else, a car bomb, a dirty bomb, whatever it might be, and figure out the ways that you can rewire the main arteries that go into the heart of your city, which is the center of any economic metro area. You have to be able to figure out quickly how you can rewire that heart so that it continues to pump.
So Bob, I want to turn it over to you. So the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is a new division of DHS. One thing I learned from you and your team before we started this, which seems intuitive, but I never thought about it this way, is 90% of critical infrastructure is federal government infrastructure. And yet when these things...
No. The majority of critical infrastructure is privately owned.
Private sector.
Privately,
yeah, sorry, right.
Yes.
That's what I meant to say. I flipped my
federal.
stats around, and I'm glad that you fixed me.
That's other countries.
Sorry, that was...
Countries that we don't want to be like.
In my head. Good, thank you for catching me. So, but when these hit, you need to bring the government and the private sector together quickly. So how are you thinking about that, and what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, and I wish we had an hour and a half to riff on what Governor Mao was saying, because in some ways, I'm dealing with the same thing at a national level that he's dealing with at the community level, and a lot of what we're trying to do at a national level through Andre and the work we're doing is push down the ability for communities to do that and enable that. So we are trying to put together, our part of resilience is sort of putting together public and private networks to share information, understand risk, and take actions to make sure that critical infrastructure is going to function in the face of duress. And so the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at its core has the job to make sure our infrastructure works in the face of potential cyber incidents or physical incidents, whether they be man-made attacks or natural disasters. And so we take a functional approach, tend to care the most about infrastructure that matters to keep people connected, to help restore, to be resilient, and we talk about that in terms of lifeline functions, transportation networks, communications networks, energy systems, water systems. But we're also had to focus, so let me start with those four. So resilience is, in a lot of ways, and we've learned this in disaster response, if those networks can get up and running, businesses will get up and running, community, we can do the life-sustaining missions, communities can get back together more quickly. But you know who best knows how to get those businesses up and running? The business owners. And so they have to be at the table. They have capacity. Let's just not rely on federal capacity and local government capacity alone. Let's have the ability to pull in private capacity, put that together, use the kind of information Governor Mao is talking about, and do some integrated prioritization, hopefully based on resilience planning in advance, to put this stuff together. The use case that is most familiar to a lot of us is in a hurricane or flooding type incident, but at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, we obviously are focusing on some other things too. And so we saw last year for the first time ransomware attacks that were directed at cities that had real implications on the functioning of transportation networks, for example. We are thinking about things in terms of supply chain security, and as we go to deploying a 5G network that will allow us to take advantage of all the wondrous things in technology, the kinds of things that were on the panel previously, how do we know that's secure and so that there aren't no new vulnerabilities introduced in? So think about supply chain security in any vulnerable infrastructure, weather, the types of things we've been thinking about there. So we're trying to put together the connection of understanding what could cause the functions to fail, making it less likely that that incident happens, but if that incident does happen, putting together partnerships. We work very closely with the majority of Fortune 500 companies around the country, putting together partnerships so that we can take advantage of public and private joint effort to restore functionality.
And you're doing work in elections security too, which I thought was...
Yeah, I tried to figure out how I thematically could hit election security into that response, and I decided ultimately no, so let me take the second question. I mean, we believe that the ability to vote, the democratic process, is a critical function that our country depends on. So over the last 3 years, largely because what the Russian government attempted to do and did to some extent to our presidential election in 2016, we have built partnerships with state election directors, secretaries of state, local election officials, and private vendors to make sure that a foreign government doesn't have the ability to interfere with our election through cyber means. That's incredibly important. It's not only incredibly important because we want to make sure it doesn't happen, but we want all of you who are voters out there to know we've got that effort working together. Federal government is in support of state and local governments who could...
May I, as a Democrat, interject and applaud that? Sure, I don't want to get you in trouble, but no, that's awesome.
Yeah, and
there's actually federal money to help states do that.
There's
right?
federal money that there was somewhere in the order of $380 million through the Help America Vote Act that came out, and then we have capacity. We've got money in our budget, and we have teams that go out there and support.
Rachel, I do some work with Grant Thornton in this area, and they're doing a lot on smart governance, but they're working with the state of New York, and it's really awesome what the federal government is allowing an on its toes state like New York to be able to do, to look at, you talk about supply chain, there's a supply chain to the security of our votes, right? From the state boards of election to the county, and there's gaps in it, so.
Making sure we understand the risk, and yeah.
No, that's very heads up stuff. Thank you for doing that, Bob.
Appreciate that.
So we have like 5 minutes left, which is a bummer.
We're just getting warmed up.
I know, that's how I feel too. But I do want to leave some time for questions, but what I want to do is sort of go down the line, starting with you, Andre, and I want to know sort of what is your short-term goal? Like, what should every city be thinking about as your one short-term thing to make your community more resilient and your long-term goal?
Right. So as city planners begin to think about what the design framework needs to look like for their smart city, short term, I want to establish partnerships in communities like here in Austin, Boston, Pittsburgh, Research Triangle Park, the Valley, where I can be leveraged as a trusted partner to test out technologies that will ultimately be beneficial to Bob Kowalski at my partner agency, right? And long term, what I would like to do is revisit the fact that we significantly need an industrial base that's motivated around homeland security challenges. And I'd like to try to provide a market exposure opportunity for the maker community to be that go-to repository for homeland security challenges in the future.
Well, what about you? What's your advice?
So I'll just build off that, and I appreciate that Andre wants to put it in my hands, but what we want to do is put in the hands of communities around the country the technology.
Man, you do all.
Just reiterating what Andre said, we're at a moment where cities are revolutionizing. We can layer on security after that happens, or we can think about security as it happens. We can layer on resilience after it happens, or we can think about resilience as it happens. And we need to connect the communities together so we're doing it as it all happens. In a specific area of how to do that is procurement policy, and making sure that as you're out procuring the next generation, as you're building out the regimes in your procurement policies of testing and maintenance and things like that, be thinking about security, be thinking about resilience as a requirement for who you're doing business with. That's going to be helpful. It's not about just getting the lowest cost provider out there. It's not about just honoring some priorities. Security has to be, in that conversation. I think if we can have sort of a revolution in how we do government procurement, I think that's going to leave us in better stead.
Yeah, I think the short term is preparedness, and the long term is resilience. And the journey along the way are really the twin engines of geospatial awareness and intentional redesign.
Geospatial awareness and intentional redesign. That's interesting. So does anybody have any questions from the audience? Sasha here has the mic. Start here. How much time do we have?
Hi, my name's Ann. I'm here from City of Philadelphia government. Unfortunately, we have a high percentage of poor people who do not have internet in the home, are not digitally savvy. So when we're talking about disaster communications, we're looking for examples of cities that have not only been intentional about partnering with Twitter and others that are on the internet, but also strategies to build like the human infrastructure for reliable information on the ground. Do you know of any examples in the US that are employing these like face-to-face, like formal or informal infrastructures of humans in addition to the digital space?
Humans? I know, let me, since I threw out the snarky humans thing, look, it all comes down to human beings. And I think we underestimate the degree of penetration and use, the extent to which we're all connected now. And part of it was partly due to really good programs put forward in the Obama administration to make sure poor people have phones and have access, including the cell phone, the capacity for videos, which has all sorts of positive implications when it comes to more accountable, fair, and civil policing. But it also has an impact in terms of connecting poor people to services that are oftentimes located far away from them, or from information that in an emergency can be very life-saving. I know at least in the city of New York, they are making much greater and intentional use of the ability to communicate by text messaging to people, both to prepare for the upcoming census and also healthcare enrollment. And I would imagine also in emergencies. And I know that many cities became more adept at using reverse 911 to communicate with people. And thanks to upgrades funded by that emergency management fee that we all pay on our phones. They're able to do that digitally as well. So I think that seems to me, anyway, from what I've seen, to be where a lot of cities are moving to traditionally forgotten or communities that were not communicated with in authentic and direct ways is the digital, the phone.
Do we have any other questions in the audience? Probably have time for one more.
Thank you guys for putting on a great panel, obviously with a very timely issue, very complicated issue in which, we want to figure out how everybody can work together better, and I'm sure you deal with this every day. My question is how do you actually engage with private sector, cyber defensive companies, and making sure that you're not kind of duplicating or, crossing streams in research and development, but trying to, push the market into the right ways, like you mentioned, and pushing for more resilience folks, resilient-oriented solutions, through asset owners?
Sure. So at a simple level, we do that through our National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center when we're constantly having conversations with network defense companies. What are you seeing? What are we seeing? Can we compare notes? Obviously, a private sector company who's doing it on behalf of the client has to protect that information, as you know, but it's important to have general sharing there. We are very keen on not going out and saying you need to have the government be the folks who are helping you do your network defense. Use the market. Let's create a market space. Let's raise the standards of how this profession is working. Federal money is being pumped into the system that hopefully allows market solutions, allows people to be buyers of market solutions. But as that turns out, making sure that we have the mechanisms in place to share information so that if Mandiant or FireEye or one of those companies sees something that could have broader impacts on national security implications, we know about it enough that we're looking for that we can compare notes, and if it's a national security issue, we can start working together on it.
And also from an innovation standpoint, so Bob speaking to the operational side of the cyber question, although my team is extremely good at what they do, we actually have our core competencies and expertise come to us from the private sector. So we are not necessarily writing code or anything like that, but what we'll do is we'll go out with some type of solicitation, hopefully around an innovative procurement process to try to get those talents into the system. And then we bounce those off of the demand signals that we get from our partners like CISA, FEMA, the other DHS components.
Well, friends,
Thank you.
That was quick.
I am sorry that we have to wrap it up because I have a lot more questions, but hopefully you'll be milling about and we can catch you. And in the meantime, we have another amazing panel on the future of work that is starting in about 5 minutes, so let's take a quick break now.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.